Welcome to Open Studio on Brattleboro Community Television. My name is Chris Lenoir, and today I'm joined by someone who is well known in the world of performing arts and literature, Peter Gould. Good to see you, sir.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Now, you have a long list of accolades, and that's why I just introduced you as Peter Gould, but let's go through some of those right now. You're an award-winning actor, an award-winning playwright, novelist. Last year, we were on my radio program because the Vermont Arts Council actually honored you as an arts educator as well. Kind of a new venture today that we're talking about as a memoirist, if that's a word. Can I coin that as a word, memoirist?
I think it's a word, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. It's called Horse-Drawn Yogurt, and Green Writers Press just put it out. For those watching this interview before Wednesday, June the 14th, you're going to be doing a free reading of it at Brooks Memorial Library starting at 7 p.m.
That's right.
And then you also have an afternoon reading at the Guilford Meeting House on Sunday, June the 25th. Those are probably on your website, yes? Mm-hmm. So why don't you go ahead and give your web address right now?
PeterGouldVermont.com.
All right, perfect.
Easy.
Perfect. Now, this is a memoir, not an autobiography. It's not something that kind of like spans your entire life, but focuses on a very specific time and place in your life. Tell us about that.
It's my 9 years on the farm. I was a member of a utopian movement which spread completely around the United States in the 70s, and it was called Back to the Land. And we who actually went back to the land from coast to coast, no matter what state we were in, we didn't really know that we were a part of some huge movement. It was just, I had heard that some friends of mine had bought a farm in Vermont in the summer of 1968. I was very moved to go up for one night and see it. And then I completed some of the other things I was doing in my life, but there was a gravitational pull that pulled me back.
And you were coming.
there.
You were coming from where at the time?
College, and then graduate school. I dropped out of Harvard Graduate School. I was studying Sanskrit, Indian studies, and Buddhism, but it was not. 1968 was probably the worst year in the United States history to be in graduate school, because the Vietnam War was getting worse and worse. Everybody who was my age, well, I shouldn't speak for everybody, most people who were my age knew that the war was a mistake, and many people that we knew had gone off to fight it and come back wounded or dead. And we were so opposed to the war that it didn't seem like the good time to be up in the ivory tower studying Sanskrit. So on the night of August 28th or 29th, 1968, which will live in history because that was the night that the cops in Chicago just entered the crowd of protesters at the convention, and all hell broke loose with their billy clubs and batons. And I watched that on TV the first night that it was on. The second night I was about to watch it, and I said, no, I'm just not going to watch that again. And I got into my old Volvo, and I drove up to Vermont instead to visit the farm that my friends had just bought.
And what was the farm called? I know it had a specific name.
Packer Corners Farm.
Packer Corners Farm,
Yeah.
and it ended up.
That's what it's still called.
And it ended up growing into. I mean, is it fair to call it a commune
Yes,
for
it
the
was a
time?
commune, yes.
How many people ended up there? Would you say at capacity?
14.
14.
Perhaps, yeah. And it was never a farm where people came and went. You heard about it through friends. You came and maybe spent a little while as a visitor. You went away and thought about it. You heard that somebody was leaving and there was maybe a space. The fact that there was a space didn't mean that there was actually any room. But like in my case, when I went there, I'm about to read a passage from the book when I discovered that when I actually moved there for good, there really was no place to be.
Yeah, let me ask you before you read that. I mean, how you would characterize these? Would you call them essays? Would you call them stories? It is nonfiction. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to just exhibit a slice of life at different times during your stay there, or actually trying to derive some sort of moral?
Yeah. We should retreat a little bit.
Okay.
Back when I was a lot younger, I stuttered extremely badly in school. That was very hard for me. And I knew that I had a voice inside me that was just exploding inside me, wanting to come out. It came out as art. It did not come out as theater. Because people said, you should do some theater, you're pretty funny. I said, no, I will never do theater. That's one thing you can check off. I'm not going to do that.
Little did they know.
But I knew that I had a whole artistic side inside. And the thing that it mostly did, well, I drew drawings. This is an example of the ink work that I did. And this kind of ink work is done with a bottle of ink and a quill, old-fashioned, very carefully, you know.
Okay.
And so, because if you spill it, things can go wrong. The other thing that I had inside me was writing. I always knew that I wanted to write, and my whole life has been a constant search to find my writer's voice, which I always found in fiction. So the first book which I wrote when I went to the farm was called Burnt Toast. This was my first novel.
And that actually goes back to the time when you were living
at
Packers Corner.
And in the wintertime, my first winter at the farm, I realized that in the wintertime, in the dead of winter, buried in the kind of snow we used to have, there wasn't that much to do except to keep warm. And I had just moved there. My father had just died, and I got a real kick in the pants to write the novel, which I had been thinking about for years, and Burnt Toast was it. I didn't know that I had hit the zeitgeist, which meant that there were people out there who ran publishing companies who were looking for books just like mine, because the commune movement had begun, and it was beginning to go national, and people were interested in what the folks who lived back to the land had to say. So that this was probably the first fiction that was written about a commune in New England. And the other books I've written since then have been all fiction. My wife Molly has been saying for years, Peter, look at this book about the farm. Look at that book about that farm. You have a particular story to tell. Your stories are true. Some of these people who are writing these books don't quite get it. And you know, it's really your responsibility to write your book. And I was saying, yeah, I'll do that someday. I have a lot of theater to do. I have all this work I have to do with kids, and I have my fiction. So this, finally, I did sit down over the past couple years and take some of my favorite stories about the farm, some of which were written in some form.
So yeah, you had been journaling.
Yeah, journaling, but
times.
also written stories. And some of them were still in my head. And I talked with Dee Dee, my great friend, and I said, I have this other book. It's not fiction. It's truth, it's history. And it doesn't really tell a through line of this is when the farm started and this is what we learned. And it's not one of these books, which I just can't stand. Books about, we made a mistake. There were failures along the way. People overdosed, or people went away, they're very, very sad, or they didn't really know how to fix a tractor, or people left and they went off to Wall Street and got rich. I can't stand that kind of book. I wanted to write a positive book about the wonderful things that we learned at the farm, and the way that we learned how to live together in a whole different way. And Molly had been encouraging me for years to write that book. So when I finally put the stories all together, it's in a virtual way. I laid it out like a patchwork quilt. Mm-hmm. And I saw a few holes that needed to be filled. So the most recent stories, the 3 or 4 most recent stories in this book, are stories that I just wrote.
Okay. Well, I'd love it if you shared at least a passage of one, maybe not an entire story. I don't know how long the individual stories are, but I know you've selected a couple of excerpts here. So tell us what you're going to read.
This is an interesting story to read at this time, because my wife Molly, who serves in the Vermont House, is about to go back in a few weeks because the session is not over. And one of the things that they're going to vote again on is marijuana legalization. And this is a story which I really had to write. Well, they're all stories that I had to write, okay?
Right.
This is a story that I had to write about our farmer friend who lived just over the border in Massachusetts, who, you know, he went out of business as a dairy farmer, and he decided that he would plant marijuana, 5 acres of it.
Oh, okay.
So this story is called Ralph's 5 Acres. And when he planted the crop, he was about the age I am now. I'm not sure. Well, he had silver hair. Ralph's 5 acres. Son, when you're old enough, you can make your own decision whether you want to try marijuana or not. Some folks say that if you're going to try a recreational substance, marijuana is way better than beer. For your health, I mean. But that'll be up to you, okay? Because by the time you're 21, it'll most likely be legal here. I hope you will use your good sense. You have a lot of that. People around here used to run into plenty of trouble getting involved with pot, or loco weed, they'd call it. We had quite a productive little patch at the farm. I took care of it all summer. September, we hang it up in the hayloft to dry. Never sold a bud of it. People here smoked it or cooked with it, or we gave it away. And later, I know your daddy had a special plant in the deep woods near the Massachusetts border. I know because he had me water it when he went off to South America. We never ran into trouble, but like I said, some people did. But I don't think anyone ever got into more of a mess than old Ralph. I wish you'd been around to meet Ralph. He had straight up silvery hair and steely cool blue eyes, a ruddy face and big muscular shoulders, a big wide smile and a generous laugh. Huge hands that could squeeze a rifle trigger easy and hit a deer a quarter mile away, or a field strip a bulldozer, or pull a borning calf gently out of her mother. There's 100 stories I could tell you about Ralph. He taught me and your daddy a lot. He did everything in a big way. One time during the war, he and his farm boy buddies rode a bus down to the Springfield Draft Board. But when an officer made fun of a fat young man who was one of them, Ralph picked that officer up and heaved him through a plate glass window and said, "Boys, let's go on back to our farms." It were a second-story window, too, Ralph liked to say, with that great twinkling smile of his. Said he never heard from that draft board again. And so the story goes on to tell about how when finally the conditions and the market forced him to sell his dairy herd, he took to growing marijuana.
And you're going to be reading more passages from stories, both on Wednesday, June the 14th at Brooks Memorial Library in the main reading room, and then again on Sunday, June 25th, if people are watching this interview prior to either of those, and that June 25th date is in the afternoon at the Guilford Meeting House. I was going to ask you about writing voice, because as you mentioned, this is the first time you're attempting nonfiction, but it sounds to me very much like you're inhabiting a character there, even though this is a piece of nonfiction. Did you approach it in that way?
Yeah, well, I said earlier that that everything I've written in my life has been an attempt to find a voice. And I even think that that's not very special, because I think that everybody who went to the farms in those years was going in search of discovering something about themselves, maybe even discovering their a voice. But when I really sat down to write, and even now today, when I sit down to write my books, I wrote this one a few years ago. It's called Marley, also by Green Writers Press.
And that one actually, I remember, was performed, right?
Yeah, that was performed in Burnt Toast, Right Naked. I have lots of books, but they're all written in a different voice.
Right.
The person who's speaking in each of these books is not me. And in fact, even though this is a book of history, a nonfiction, even so, each one is written in a voice which is not exactly my own, which is good for me because if I have to read it out loud on stage in front of people, particularly for the home crowd, which is always hard. I mean, give me an audience of 3,000 people in a theater somewhere far away, and I'm fine. But when I'm sitting, when I'm at the library and looking out at a small audience of people that I know, that's the only time in my life I ever get something approaching stage fright.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could see you inhabiting a character even as you were warming up to read that passage.
It's convenient, therefore, to find a voice to speak every story, and in the writing of it, and then in the speaking of it, that's not exactly your own.
So you don't really even draw a distinction between writing nonfiction and writing fiction as far as an approach. It sounds to me you just took a very fictional approach, but the names and dates were kept the same.
A good question, Chris, because among people who know me, like particularly my wife Molly, who knows me very well, she says, "Well, you do tend to embellish your stories a little bit. No, I say this is all true. This is all
Right.
true. But then again, how could it be 100% true if for each one I'm slightly modulating my own voice into the voice of the person who's telling the story.
Plus, as you're working through the stories, it has to evoke other memories for you. That are like, oh, and then it's got to be hard to make sure you don't go off in the tangent for a story if you've written with a particular intent, or did you kind of just let the process go out in that way? Like if it triggered another memory, you just sort of followed it wherever it led you?
I think people who meditate would probably understand this. When you sit down to meditate, when you close your eyes and you just go into that world, that silent world inside yourself, you really have to be open to surprise, to whatever happens. When I'm writing, it's the same. If I can find a time to write, in the morning, I go for an hour or 2 hours, I have to really be ready for a surprise, for the unexpected. And where did that come from? That metaphor came from somewhere. Doesn't even feel like it came from my brain. It just landed there. And I get into this state of mind where I feel like, wow, ideas are just flying around.
Right.
They have wings, and they're flying around in the room, and they're waiting for a fertile brain to land in. And fertile brains are very scarce these days because everybody is so tuned in with their earbuds and with the media that we're being occupied by. And if they can find a fertile brain that's ready to listen to what they have to say, they'll land there. And it's often a complete surprise.
Right.
And you go with it and write in it. I wanted to write this story about how it felt to have spent 6 or 7 years trying to create an awkward solidarity with the poor of the world by not having a TV, not having a radio, not having a phone, not having a toilet, not having a shower, not owning a bathing suit, not owning a flashlight, walking at night in the dark, and how it felt when I actually had the chance to go and live with a family in Mexico who were really the rural poor, and to understand that everything that I'd been trying to do up to that point was sort of, I wouldn't say a fraud, but it didn't go deep enough.
Okay.
And when I borrowed some seeds from them to bring them back to plant, I was trying to write a story about how it felt right before I put those seeds in the ground in Vermont on my own farm. And I wanted to talk to people through the medium of this book about about everything that those seeds meant. And I found the responsibility of telling that story was so huge, so overwhelming, that I couldn't even write it in the I form as first person. So that story, which is about seeds, is written in the form of you.
Okay. Is that the other selection that
No,
you selected? Okay, I
it's
didn't
not
know if it was
even-
one.
It's not even one I selected for today, but it was so important. And so it's also been something I've found out over the years, that not only do you find the particular voice that you're writing each story in, but you find the form too. And it's not something that you can sit out and plan to do. With this book, Marley, the form that struck me with this one was so unusual that I had to look around and say, well, where did that idea come from? You think I can carry this off to write it in that form? And I tried, but as you can see, it's a thin book, so 100 pages.
Made it as a novella.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah. So when you sit down to write, you should prepare yourself for a journey that's so exciting and so stimulating, and be open to surprises, not knowing where this idea is going to take you, not knowing what voice is going to come out through you, and not even knowing for sure what form the writing is going to take.
Can I ask you to read another selection here? I enjoyed that first one tremendously,
Okay.
and I know you picked at least one other one here in the time that we have.
Yeah, so this is a story that I wrote for the book. I think this was pretty much the last one that I wrote right before I handed the manuscript to Dee Dee and said, okay, we got to get this out because we've got some readings scheduled, all right? So this story is called Wait, Don't Throw That Away. Here is something the Back to the Landers don't get enough credit for. We were effective recyclers and reclaimers of old junk, old tools, piles of lumber, recipes, remedies, space itself, a way of life. Stepping out the kitchen door, I remember the first time I saw it all. That tractor shed over there that I studied when I arrived to stay, look, couldn't that be a loft? The 2x6s look sound. You could make a ladder. What about if you took those old boards piled over there and pulled the antique nails out of them? Wait, don't throw those nails away. Don't throw anything usable away. They're made of original bog iron steel, so they don't rust or bend. You can reuse them. Separate the square-cut rose-head ones and sell them to the antiques guy down on Keatsbrook Road and get a bit of money. Then wire brush the boards, scrape off the soft spots and the moss, and make a floor on the loft. Put up walls, build a captain's bed to store your old college textbooks beneath, stick a stovepipe out the roof, wired tough against the west wind, and you can actually live in the room you build up there for the next 9 years of your life. That old nail barrel? Who even knows what a nail barrel is anymore? Just tap the hoops down tight to make it stable. They used to make a special Cooper's hammer for just that operation. Now, throw a wide board on top. You'll have a desk. With a recycled window from the pile in the barn, you'll get that view to the west where your ideas will come from, and a place to write your first novel, Burnt Toast. Near the eastern farm well is the old machine dump and scrapyard. You dig a bit and find some rusty stove parts. You take them to the village blacksmith in Greenfield. You make a new stove body, and you have an airtight with the wicked adjustable downdraft air intake for only $50. But don't light the fire at night. You won't need it. You burrow into your duck, goose, pheasant, turkey feather sleeping bag with only your nose sticking out, and you can light the stove when you need to at dawn, when you want to sit up and write that novel.
Nice, nice indeed. I was just thinking as you were reading that people who knew you during that time at Packers Corners, either in the commune or just in the community, must get a real kick out of reliving these with you. I know the book is relatively new, but you must have gotten some reaction from some friends of that time on it by now.
Yeah, everybody loves the book, and I was invited to come back to the farm on Sunday, April 8th, and do a launch there. So the official farm-based launch was right at the farm in the big room and veranda porch. My good friend and I, we cleared out the room and put in as many seats as we could. The stove was going because it was a cold day, and about 60 people came. And they were pleased to hear the story, but nobody was more pleased than me, because to come back with that story and read it in that room, and this was a room where, back in the old days when I used to write, I would come down from my room and give my writing to somebody else to read out loud, because I had too much stage fright, and I was not a good reader out loud. So this was the first time on Sunday, April 8th, that I actually heard myself read a story out loud in that room. So it was very emotional.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you talked a little about some of the serendipitous circumstances, Molly encouraging you to write this at this time, deadlines, things like that. But there had to be a reason that you wanted to tell these stories at this particular time, a little bit more than 40 years on. I mean, what do you think is relevant about these stories today, and what do you want them to say?
Two things are very important. The first thing that's very important is that, as you know, and as everybody out there in the TV audience knows, Vermont is experiencing a wonderful renaissance of food. You know, organic food. We're living in the golden age of cheese, the golden age of beer, the golden age of value-added farm products. And I just wanted people to know that, just as I was one of the farmers who founded our farmers market here in town in 1974, we all who came back to the land in the 70s were founders of a sort, because we needed to eat and we wanted to farm organically, and we wanted to learn how to make good bread and to make good home brew. And so most of the experimentation that took place at the farms in the 70s had to do with food and feeding ourselves and making a surplus to sell to our neighbors. And that work turned over the soil for what's going on in Vermont now. And when I really get that people understand that, I feel good about that. You really can't write about the new movement in local farm-to-table food in Vermont without taking that leap back and going to the 1970s and seeing where it all started. There's one or two stories about that in here. There was a time at the farm after we'd been there for a year or two when we decided we can buy a cow. You know, we're good enough
Right.
to know how to take care of a cow, and what we didn't know was that this cow would give us a tremendous amount of milk. You know, 9 gallons a day, and that was and we really needed to know how to make cheese. Now, when I go to the farmers market, there's 7 or 8 different stalls of people selling the most incredible cheeses in the style of great cheeses of the world. And I tell them, and I ask them, how long have you been doing this? For a year or 2. That's interesting. And where'd you learn how to do it? From the internet. And you know, we had no idea, and there were no sources. There was maybe one a pamphlet from the USDA, which was aimed at farmers with a larger production in the Midwest. I got that pamphlet. I gleaned how to make cheese on a smaller scale with 1 cow. I figured out how to do it. And I was probably the first person on a Vermont commune who made cheese. And then I went around to all the other farms who decided to get a cow, and I taught them too how to heat the milk to a certain temperature, how to add the rennet, how to cut the curd, how to do this, how to inoculate it. And I'm here to tell you my cheeses were terrible.
Surprised yourself, though, that you knew that much of the process, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
But I just want to finish. The second thing is that we're living in a really dangerous time right now. And so when you have access to the archives of a history that you think are really important to be stored and to be kept alive for the next generation, you just can't put that in a box and put it underneath your bed. There's stuff about relationship of young people to the land. There's stuff about truth. There's stuff about the fate of the earth that are very important, getting more important all the time.
Right. Well, I know you said at the beginning of the interview that you didn't necessarily know what you were doing or thought of yourself as part of a movement, but there was definitely a counterculture intention to try and change the way people lived and to try and change the value system. And looking back on that now, you've got to be gratified. Maybe you didn't get everything that you intended to get in terms of changing society, but you've certainly accomplished quite a bit and have to feel really good about a lot of those things.
Yeah, but we didn't do it just in a vacuum. I mean, we who arrived in Vermont back to the land, where as I say in the book, a lot of the farmers at that point were watching their children leave. Their sons had gone off to fight the war. Others had came back wounded. Others had gone away because the life in many of the dairy farms and other kinds of farms in Vermont had been so hard that the young people didn't want anything to do with it. And just as they were disappearing down the road, we arrived full of our idealism, no money, but interested to find out, what's that tool over there for? Show me that. Oh yeah, is that what it's for? Show us how to do that. So anything that we accomplished in our 10 years of the peak of the Back to the Land movement we have to say that was on the shoulders of the people who were already here.
Yeah, it wasn't like something brand new. It was
No.
just carrying something forward, something that was kind of here and maybe dormant and certainly reinvigorated and as you say, invigorated today. And you continue to influence so many people in this community and across the region, Peter. And I appreciate you taking just a little bit of time out of your schedule to talk with me today. Thanks so much.
Oh, it was nice to be here.
Yeah, and I want to remind everybody out there that Peter will be reading at Brooks Memorial Library, 7 p.m. on Wednesday, June the 14th, and then again Sunday afternoon at the Guilford Meeting House. That's Sunday, June the 25th. And I want to thank you all for watching Open Studio today on Brattleboro Community Television. You can see this and other episodes online at brattleboro.tv.org.